we stand on guard for thee.
We'll call that the doors be open. Order, alors. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this summer residents of Surrey Centre sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" as we celebrated the accomplishments of Whalley Little League. Thanks to the thrilling victory in the Little League Canadian Championships, the all-star team from Whalley earned the right to represent Canada at the Little League World Series in South Williamsport, Pennsylvania. There they made Surrey proud, playing hard and showing immense strength and enthusiasm on the field, despite the fact that their team faced adversity prior to the tournament. For a time, it was unclear on whether or not one of their teammates, Dio Gama, could join them. However, with the help of Ministers of Immigration and Public Safety, he was able to go. It was my honor to host them in my constituency office this summer. This wonderful celebration included a surprise message from our Prime Minister, which delighted the players and helped turn it into an unforgettable day for the team. A special thanks goes out to the team's parents and coaching staff, led by Mike Marino, for following and supporting their team on the road for 46 days.
The honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 6 years, Pie Restaurant has supported children in government-subsidized or low-income households by providing them with materials needed for educational success. Since creating Pie Education, we've supplied over 10,000 backpacks to children in need in the Barrie area. Some of our community partner organizations include the Barrie Municipal Not-for-Profit Housing, Simcoe County Housing Corporation, Canadian Mental Health Association, Barrie Native Friendship Centre, Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie, and local church groups. Having grown up in government housing, I understand how not having school supplies can create anxiety in students, which leads to decreased confidence and performance. Parents should never have to choose between buying new shoes and new school supplies. On behalf of Pie Education, I'd like to thank all of our donors, sponsors, volunteers, and community partners. It is because of your generous support that over 2,200 children are prepared for success this school year.
Wow. The honourable member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to recognize the Executive Director of the Delta Family Resource Centre, Kemi Jacobs. Ms. Jacobs has over 20 years of community involvement and has been a leader in the non-government and public sectors in many roles. Some of those roles include the President of the Canadian Council for Refugees, Executive Director of Cultural Link Settlement Services, Chairperson of the National Anti-Racism Council of Canada, Director of House at Toronto Community Housing, and the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. A truly remarkable individual. That is why it comes as no surprise that Ms. Jacobs will be included in the Honourable Jean Augustine's book entitled 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women. This is quite an honour for Kemi to be recognized, and I would like to share in that recognition by congratulating her today on her continuous hard work and her volunteerism inside and out of Humber River Black Creek.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Her name was Azrea Copenant. She was 14 years old and she was loved, and this nation failed her because when she needed help, nothing was available and she died alone. And Azrea is just one of the 5,800 youth that we have lost in this nation to suicide. What country watches the death of its children and does nothing? Because Canada is one of the few developed countries without a national suicide prevention plan. And this is why I'm asking my colleagues from all parties to work together to establish Motion 174, a National Suicide Prevention Action Plan. Because it's not just about youth. We are seeing the crisis of suicide and depression cut across all age groups and spectrums. And yet, there's so much that can be done. I want to give a special shout out to all the grassroots organizations and activists who are on the front lines, and they are looking to this Parliament to be a positive partner to pass Motion 174 and establish this National Suicide Prevention Action Plan. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, from the 13th to 17th December last, Lac-Saint-Jean welcomed people to the Pétanque Championship in order to take part in this important competition. They also had the privilege of tasting the best tourtière in the entire world. And there were so many eaten that it became a Guinness record. I'd also like to thank Nicolas Martel, who helped in organizing this and who put our region on the map. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, in 1912, in the small community of St. Mary's Cement was born. And 38 years later, they made their best decision by opening a plant in Bowmanville, Ontario, Mr. Speaker. For 50 years, St. Mary's in Bowmanville has literally built the Greater Toronto Area. The iconic CN Tower, Roy Thompson Hall, the Darlington Generating Station next door, all built with St. Mary's Cement. They remain one of Durham's largest employers, and 130 families are part of the St. Mary's story, a story that includes being one of the greenest plants of its kind in North America. Mr. Speaker, their motto is "Life is made to last." Well, in the last 50 years, St. Mary's has contributed greatly to our community life, from schools to hospitals to the Highway of Heroes Lav Monument to Valleys 2000, tomorrow to Durham College. I want to thank St. Mary's for being a great corporate citizen, wish them well on their celebration, and wish them a great next 50 years.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, this summer I had the chance to meet so many incredible people throughout my riding. Today I would like to recognise a young man I met for the first time. Jay Felix is a 16-year-old constituent of mine from Paradise, and I met Jay thanks to the War Amps and their 100th anniversary commemorative envelope campaign. Jay was born a partial hand amputee and has been a member of the War Amps Child Amputee Programme since he was 2 years old. He remains active with the organisation today and was asked to present me with their 100th anniversary commemorative envelope and pin. They highlight the great impact War Amps has had on this country over its 100 years and shine a spotlight on the moments and milestones in history that unite us as a nation. It was such a pleasure to hear Jay's story and to see what a great ambassador he is for War Amps Canada. Congrats, War Amps, and thank you to Jay and his mom, Cindy, for being such great members of our community. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Mr. Speaker, we understand harm reduction. That's why, to address the opioid crisis, our government has approved 26 supervised injection sites with the cooperation of provinces across Canada. But this summer, the new government in Ontario withdrew the approval of an overdose prevention site in my riding of Parkdale High Park, ostensibly because they want to review the evidence behind harm reduction. But, Mr. Speaker, the evidence is already in. As the Supreme Court stated in 2011, supervised injection sites save lives. Hospitals and healthcare workers get it. That's why they've opened a pop-up site in Parkdale in defiance of the province's position. The compassionate and progressive constituents of my riding get it. They are actively supporting this pop-up site, and so are the police and the City of Toronto. The only missing link is the province. Mr. Speaker, when lives are at stake, this cannot be a partisan issue. It is incumbent upon all elected representatives at every level of government to address the opioid crisis and to stop preventable deaths. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Thank you. I rise to honour and wish a happy 100th birthday to a remarkable Edmontonian, Frederick Major Russell. In December of 1939, Mr. Russell shipped out to the UK, serving with the Royal Canadian Signal Corps, 6th Brigade, 2nd Division. He landed at Dieppe with the Canadian troops and managed to survive the day. It's rumored he was part of the secret mission to steal the German Enigma code machine on that fateful day. Freddie denies it, claiming he never actually made it to the beach, but conspiracists will note that he was declared missing in action in the confusion, and his dog tags were somehow found far ashore that day. Freddie returned 2 years later to the beaches at Normandy and fought through France to eventually march into Dieppe when the Canadians liberated it. He fought through Belgium, Holland, and Germany. He was awarded the French Legion of Honor, France's highest honor, for his role in liberation of France. He returned to Canada, where he married his beloved Eileen, making Edmonton their home for the next 60 years of their marriage. Freddie, happy 100th birthday. Thank you for your service to Canada.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, a first in Canada. The first face transplant was performed at the Maisonneuve-Rosemont Hospital in Montreal. Last May, a medical team succeeded in performing a face transplant for Mr. Maurice Desjardins, who was seriously disfigured by a hunting accident. I want to congratulate Transplant Quebec for its leadership. I want to thank the doctors for their genius and tenacity, to the donor and his family for what is even the greatest generosity. This event reminds us of how our researchers and scientists are pushing back the frontiers of medicine. I'd like to present Motion 189 because we have to do more to improve our organ donor system. The Honourable Member for Alfred-Pélan. Mr. Speaker, what's better than laughing in order to bring together people in a community? I want to talk about the first Festival of Laughter, which will start in September next.
A stronger community through humor, because it all starts with a laugh. By sharing our joy, we strengthen our bonds as neighbors, as friends, and as a community. Thus, I'd like to congratulate Luigi Morbito and Franco Taddeo for their initiative that embellishes and strengthens our community. Le Festival Laval en Rire, c'est la diversité.
This festival means diversity and inclusion. We celebrate multiculturalism, something that characterizes our community and our country. This is a reflection of the joie de vivre of the people of Laval. Thank you.
For Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, as Deputy Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs, September 19th is very significant to me. In 2016, Claude Lalonde, who served in Somalia in '93, came to the Hill on a hunger strike looking for answers. After a photo op with Ministers of Veterans Affairs, Health and National Defence, with a promise made, then broken, followed by another hunger strike, 2 days of testimony were his to orchestrate at the Veterans Affairs Committee study on mental health. The testimonies sounded the alarm on mefloquine poisoning of our troops, up to and including the Afghan war. As a result, Health Canada changed the drug label, and mefloquine became a drug of last resort for our troops. In 2017, the first mefloquine rally took place after the Prime Minister ignored mefloquine advocate, veteran David Bona, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Today, the second mefloquine rally is celebrating Quinism Foundation's expanding research to scientifically prove mefloquine poisoning impact on our Canadian servicemen and women. Come outside, meet your veterans.
The Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, autumn is an important time in the riding of Shefford. It's a period of abundance where everything is literally the apple of everyone's eye. We welcome 500,000 visitors during this time of harvesting apples. People also visit orchards. Right in the middle of Montérégie, there is the magnificent town of Rougemont with its 500,000 apple trees, which makes it the apple capital of Canada. The region of Rougemont pioneered cider production, apple cider production, and is also a tourist destination which impresses by the abundance of its land. Until October 14th next, we invite you to take part in the 16th Gourmet Weekend. Today we have given everyone a wonderful calling card from Rougemont, an apple from the apple capital of Rougemont.
Member for Essex.
For too many women across Canada, gender-based violence is a part of their reality. To this day, the stigma and the threat of retaliation have prevented women from speaking out against their abusers. Too many cases have been shrouded in darkness. Women come together to provide support for one another and raise our united voices against harassment and gender-based violence. In Windsor, Essex, our Take Back the Night event is happening this Friday. Take Back the Night is a grassroots organization focused on uniting women to stand together, refusing to be silent about gender-based violence. Events will be hosted in communities across Canada and in over 30 countries globally. Women across the country will come together to support each other's struggles, be inspired by the strength of survivors, and to remember the women we have lost to violence. I invite women from across Canada and my colleagues in this House to join in their local events. This Friday, I look forward to seeing women raise a candle high and adding their voice as we take back the streets and take back the night for all women.
The honourable member for Portage, Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, here's the report card on the Prime Minister's summer activities. Reversing the carbon tax, he failed. Dealing with illegal border crossers, failed. Recalling the House to get TPP ratified, failed again. Surfing in Tofino, B+. Mansplaining his way through a groping allegation, I'd say A+ on that one. Negotiating a trade deal with the U.S., underway with challenges, which is Liberal code for didn't get it done. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's see if the Prime Minister did any better by the numbers. High-priced lobbyists attending Liberal fundraisers, 200 of them. Wow. Taxpayer dollars spent on the Trans Mountain Pipeline, $4.5 billion. Wow. Shovels in the ground to build the pipeline, 0. Whoa. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, this summer of failure has made one thing very clear. Canadians cannot afford another 4 years of that Prime Minister.
Honourable member for Le Saint-Léonard-Verdun.
Monsieur le Président, partout.
Mr. Speaker, everywhere in the country, young Canadians are pushing back the frontiers of innovation. Their intelligence, dynamism, and audacity is making Canadian innovation known worldwide.
Minds and their contributions to our society. On behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Science and Sport, I would like to invite all my colleagues to attend the Prime Minister's Science Fair tonight in Centre Block from 5 to 7 p.m.
This event will showcase the remarkable work of young researchers, innovators from all over Canada. Let us celebrate these formidable young people who represent the future of our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, quand le Premier ministre a dépensé 4 000...
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spent $4.5 billion of taxpayers' money, and he said it was to guarantee that construction would start this summer. He failed. The project has been on hold for over 3 weeks, and Canadians have no idea what the Liberals plan to do. Can the Prime Minister tell the thousands of Canadians who depend on the jobs to build the pipeline when they'll be able to go back to work? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the outset, what I said to Canadians was that I understood that the environment and the economy go hand in hand. That's why when we took government, we invested in environmental protection. We worked in partnership with Indigenous peoples to create economic growth in the right way in this country. That is exactly what we're going to continue to do. The Conservatives, for their part, want us to minimize environmental protection and set aside Indigenous peoples. That is not what we're going to do. We are going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, more to this past summer as the Prime Minister's summer of failure. And the judge that ruled on the Trans Mountain case agrees. That judge said that, quote, Canada failed in Phase 3 to engage in dialogue meaningfully. How can the Prime Minister mismanage this pipeline project so terribly, Mr. Speaker?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in 2012, the Conservative government limited the scope of the National Energy Board in terms of its analyzing the impacts on marine ecosystems. That's why we have moved forward in any case with the Oceans Protection Plan to look carefully at how we can protect the southern resident killer whale pod, how we can make sure that we are protecting our oceans from spills and accidents. That's something that's important to British Columbians, Mr. Speaker, but it's important to all Canadians. That's why we're moving forward in a responsible way that protects the environment and that works with Indigenous peoples as we look to get the right projects built for Canada.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister just keeps saying things that he knows aren't true. The previous Conservative government got 4 major pipeline projects built. We succeeded where he is failing. And one of those, Mr. Speaker, the Kinder Morgan Anchor Loop, opened up Asian markets by getting Canada's resources to Tidewater. But it was his execution of the process that failed. Again, is this just part of a plan to phase out Canada's energy sector?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives haven't understood, even with the drubbing they got in the 2015 election, is the only way to build a strong economy is to protect the environment at the same time and work with Indigenous peoples in a respectful way. That's what they failed to do, and that's why we're moving forward in the way that Canadians expect, doing stronger science, working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and showing the highest growth in the G7 last year after they had the lowest growth rates since R.B. Bennett.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the record on this is clear. The Conservative Party got the job done. We succeeded where he is failing. We had, through a rigorous approvals process, got 4 major pipeline projects approved and completed. It was this Prime Minister whose tough negotiating skills sent $4.5 billion to Houston investors, overpaying by almost $2 billion. That's the kind of negotiating savvy that this Prime Minister has. So my question is, just how fast did those Houston investors sign on to that deal?
Honourable Prime Minister.
They seem to be understanding that at this point the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't want the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion because that's what they would get. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, when we took ownership of that pipeline expansion project, we prevented it from being dead in the water. We know that moving forward in the right way on projects like these is what Canadians expect. Their failure to get our resources to new markets other than the United States is exactly what grew Canadians tired of this government, among many other things.
We'll have some order, please. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, they've bought it without building it. We will build it without having to buy it. That's the difference between our two parties, Mr. Speaker. If they really wanted to develop Canada's energy sector and get our resources to market, they will invite Energy East back to the table. They will scrap the carbon tax and they will scrap their plans for C69, the ban on pipeline bill. Will the Prime Minister do any of those things to get our men and women in this country back to work?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives seem full of vim and vigor in what they want to talk about, but they don't actually have any plans. The closest we've seen to it is, well, you should bring in legislation to get that pipeline built. The fact that we would expect the private sector and investors to move forward on projects in Canada, knowing that any time you want to get something built, you have to work legislation on it through this House of Commons, is not the kind of predictable, clear path that our investors from around the world or in Canada want. We're going to get clarity to be able to build things responsibly.
L'honorable député de Rimouski-Nejet.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet, Témiscouata-Les Basques.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, dairy farmers are worried. In Manitoba, David and his brother are third-generation dairy farmers who are committed to providing the highest quality milk to Canadians. But with each trade deal, Canadian dairy farmers like them are asked by Liberal and Conservative governments to give away a little bit and a little bit more. Basically, they are being asked to accept a death by 1,000 cuts. Right. Enough is enough. When will the Prime Minister do as he promised and commit to fully protect supply management?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have and are committed to protecting supply management. Supply management is a system that works for our farmers and for consumers. It was a Liberal government that brought it in 40 years ago. We understand how important it is to continue to protect our agricultural industry and our dairy producers. We continue to sign important trade deals around the world and make sure that we are protecting our supply managed industry and indeed our family dairy farms because that's what Canadians expect.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nijet-Témiscouata-Lébec.
He refuses to say it. Plusieurs producteurs laitiers.
Many dairy producers from Canada are on the Hill today, and they're concerned and worried that the government is using them as bargaining chips for NAFTA negotiations. When I meet with dairy producers in my riding, they say it's because the supply management system enables them to have stability in the costs of production that their farms can exist. The government is sacrificing them each time it has an opportunity. Some concessions, more concessions, and yet more concessions, and the system is getting weaker. Can the Prime Minister stand today and tell dairy producers directly that he will fully protect supply management? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what people clearly see is that the NDP is unable to support trade agreements. They don't know that trade agreements are good for the economy and for workers. Once again, I want to underscore our support for dairy producers and for supply management. I salute to the dairy producers who have traveled to Ottawa today to be heard with respect to their concerns. We are listening to their concerns, and we will continue to protect supply management. I thank them for the work that they do and for their presence in Ottawa today. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Our dairy producers, Mr. Speaker, have been directly attacked by Trump, and the Liberals have implied that they were flexible. Ms. Chevalier, a farmer from St. Ignace de Loyola, is afraid that new concessions in the supply management system are going to occur. After having abandoned producers under CETA and the CPTPP, how can Ms. Chevalier trust the Liberal government, trust that it will, in fact, protect supply management? Mr. Speaker, we know full well that the U.S. administration has targeted our supply management system, but Canadians know as well that on several occasions I have reiterated that we will protect supply management because it helps our farmers, our dairy producers, consumers to be sure about what they're buying. In terms of dairy, we will continue to defend the supply management system and the excellent work being done by dairy producers across the country.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I heard from Dave Taylor from Vancouver Island, who knows how important supply management is for his family farm and locally produced high-quality dairy products. Now, Liberals claim to agree with Dave, but two sources with direct knowledge of NAFTA negotiations said Canada is ready to make concessions in our dairy market. The Dairy Farmers of Canada, representing nearly 12,000 family farms, are watching this government. Will the Prime Minister promise here and now that his government will make no concessions to our dairy market, yes or no?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I will not be negotiating in public, but what I will reassure Canadians, as I have throughout this summer and throughout this past year, we will not sign a bad deal for Canada or for Canadians. I know Conservatives are worried that we need to sign a deal even if it's a bad deal. We will not be doing that. We will be ensuring that whatever deal we move forward with is the right one for Canadians, and if there is not a good deal on the table, we will not sign.
The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, on May 3rd, 2010, the following was said in this House: providing opportunities for buddies to further their private interests and giving preferential treatment to people based on the buddies who represent them is illegal, regardless of whether or not money changed hands, and the member demanded to know what were the consequences for this activity. I wonder who said that, Mr. Speaker. Well, ironically, it was the Minister of Intergovernmental and Northern Affairs and Internal Trade who said that. So I'd like to know from the Prime Minister, does he agree with the 2010 opposition member from Beausejour that the current member from Beausejour should be sanctioned?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that we have a strong system and a commissioner that oversees on ethics and conflict of interest to ensure that all Canadians can have confidence in public office holders and indeed every member of Parliament. We ensure that we work with the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner, that we follow the rules, and that we make amends whenever they bring forward concerns. That's what we will continue to do, and we thank the ethics and conflict of interest commissioner for his hard work.
The honourable member for Milton. Order.
Very glad that the Prime Minister mentioned the Ethics Commissioner, because he said this week. I would really like to have the power to express a point of view as to the gravity of the contravention when we find a contravention and what kind of sanctions should be taken. It's important to know that there will be consequences if you don't respect something. Prime Minister said that we will move forward in the ways the Ethics Commissioner recommends. I see what the Ethics Commissioner is recommending. Will the Prime Minister take the Ethics Commissioner clear recommendation and determine sanctions against this minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has among the strongest ethics rules in the world for applying to members of Parliament, and we're always looking forward to do more. We know that the trust that people have in their institutions and government is the foundation of democracy, one that is shaky in some places in the world, not one that is shaky in Canada. But we always are willing to do more. We look forward to working with all parties in this House to look at how we can continue to bolster the confidence of Canadians in the excellence of these institutions we serve.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal summer of failure continues. Between June of 2017 and 2018, the RCMP intercepted some 26,000 illegal migrants. 56% of them had a non-immigrant U.S. visa. 65% had legal status in the U.S. In addition, nearly 2,000 of those illegal immigrants are U.S. citizens. Does the Prime Minister and his team not realize that under his leadership people are flouting the law? We have a plan. What is theirs? What is the Prime Minister waiting for to resolve this problem? Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the challenge stemming from the fact that people are irregularly crossing our border. We can reassure Canadians that security screening is done and that the immigration process and refugee process is being applied to all people entering the country, whether they are irregular or not. We are fortunate to live in a country which is open and positive when it comes to immigration, and that is something that we are going to continue to defend by ensuring Canadians that we have a system that works. The honourable member. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to the Prime Minister to go to the U.S. side to read the billboard that says that it's illegal to cross the border that way. And I'd like to point out that 2,000 people crossed the border. They were illegal, but they're already American citizens. 16,000 of them have legal status in the United States. And we know that there are illegal migrants who are buying airplane tickets to cross the border. Why is the Prime Minister waiting so long to resolve this problem that has existed since his famous tweet? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are working with the U.S. administration to advance files that are important to Canadians, including border issues. We have obligations, international obligations, to analyze the files and applications for all people who cross the border. This is an obligation we have, and something that over generations has, in fact, immigration added and contributed to Canada and to its culture. We are proud to have done so. We'll continue to protect our immigration system.
Hill.
Mr. Speaker, 65%
of the people who have illegally crossed the border into Canada and claimed asylum already had legal status in the United States, one of the safest democratic places in the world. Think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. Instead of prioritizing people that are languishing in UNHCR camps, instead of prioritizing genocide survivors being reunited with their families, he's doing this. How can he possibly think this is fair?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are responding in an appropriate and measured way with extra investments to ensure that we continue to apply in its integrity our immigration and refugee system. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives enjoy criticizing and drumming up fears and anxiety, but they have no plans other than perhaps to militarize our entire border. These will not work, Mr. Speaker. We are applying our immigration system in a responsible way. We are ensuring that it remains fair. We are ensuring that Canadians remain confident in the strength of our immigration system because they can and should be.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
It is not fair to prioritize people who have legal status in upstate New York over the reunion of a family member of a genocide survivor. That is not fair. It is not fair, Mr. Speaker, to call the fears of Canadians that our immigration system is no longer sustainable. That is not fair, Mr. Speaker, and that lies on the hands of this Prime Minister. When will he close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Conservatives are putting forward criticisms without having any idea how they would actually fix this problem. We know how to fix this problem. We are working with stakeholders in the United States and around the world to remind them that there are no shortcuts to becoming a Canadian, that crossing irregularly or illegally does not get you into permanent status any quicker than any other way. This is something that is important to emphasize. The Conservatives are striking out trying to create divisions and fear, but they have no plan to handle things differently.
Honorable Député Salaberry-sur.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Yesterday, the answer by the Minister of Finance to my colleague for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie was completely off track. Elected representatives from Vaudreuil-Soulanges have been demanding answers of the NEB for 2 years on the Enbridge 9B pipeline. According to an excerpt from the letter that they received, and I quote, the NEB is obliged to put an end to the possibility of following up with the RCM. In other words, we don't like your questions, so we're not going to answer. People are entitled to answers. Does the Prime Minister find it normal for the NEB to be promoting the oil industry instead of citizens? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, there are people in this country, including members of the NDP, who believe that there's a choice that needs to be made between jobs and protecting the environment. We know that the only way to build a strong country in the future is to protect the environment while creating economic growth. That is why we are consulting. That is why we are working with Indigenous peoples, with communities. We are investing in environmental sciences in order to ensure that the decisions we make on the development of our economy protect the environment at the same time. This is something we take seriously, and we will always take seriously.
Patrie.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. In Quebec, the environment is a priority for people, and there's a true sense of urgency. But here, the Liberals are talking out of both sides of their mouths. Who says that? David Suzuki. From ordinary citizens right up to scientists, everyone is seeing Liberal duplicity. Suzuki even said that if the Minister of the Environment were honest, she would resign instead of defending the Liberal government. Does the Prime Minister think that buying a $4.5 billion pipeline using our money is a good way to fight climate change? Is that what he believes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, we can see that the NDP is claiming that there is a choice that must be made between the environment and what's good for the economy. We know that Canadians know that the only way to build a secure future for our children is to protect the environment, to fight climate change, and to invest in good jobs and a stronger future for our young people and for our communities. doing those two together is something that the NDP doesn't understand how to do. That is why we will continue to take action, respectful action. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. And Mr. Speaker, the U.S. administration cut taxes which changed the competitive nature of the situation. But on this side of the border, the government hasn't done anything. There's a study that concluded that since the government hasn't done anything, some 635,000 jobs are at stake, a huge amount in the economy, and that's why John Manley, from the head of the conference board, has said that the government needs to have a plan to enhance competitiveness. Will the Prime Minister follow the advice of John Manley, who in passing used to be a Deputy Prime Minister, a Liberal Deputy Prime Minister? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're very aware of the fact that we need to be competitive. Our businesses need to be competitive. That's why we are cutting taxes for small and medium-sized businesses across the country. We dropped them on January 1st. We will continue to reduce those taxes in January. And we are looking at ways of remaining competitive with the United States by looking at investments in competitiveness for our businesses. And so we are not going to do what the Conservatives are proposing and don't understand.
The Prime Minister's unprovoked and inaccurate partisan attack against Conservatives on NAFTA today confirms again that his election strategy is to strut around pretending to stand up to Donald Trump. Ironic, though, because his increases in taxes and his heavy regulation have led Canadian dollars to head right down south to Donald Trump's America, where Canadian investment is up 2/3 and U.S. investment in Canada is down by half. So will the Prime Minister stop all the drama on NAFTA and stop sending our money and jobs south of the border?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite wants to clarify things, he can immediately say that he disagrees with Stephen Harper's analysis that it would be better to sign a bad deal than to have no deal, because that's what Stephen Harper is on record as having recommended to Canadian parliamentarians and to Canadian negotiators. If he disagrees with Stephen Harper on that position or on any other position, please let him say so and set the record straight.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
What I disagree with is this Prime Minister's agenda, which is sending money, business, and cheap oil into the arms of Donald Trump. His higher taxes have sent money south. He blocked a pipeline to the Atlantic and another to the Pacific, which means we have to pump cheap oil into the United States. And he gave $4 billion to a Texas oil company, which is building pipelines with Canadian tax dollars in Donald Trump's America. So, Mr. Speaker, again, will the Prime Minister stop the drama and stop sending our jobs, oil, and money down south?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite agrees with Stephen Harper that it is better to sign a bad deal than to have no deal. Well, we disagree and Canadians disagree. On the issue of getting our resources to new markets, we understand how important it is. And their failure for 10 years to get a pipeline built that will get our resources in a significant way to new markets is on them. We know that the way to get these things built properly is to work with Indigenous peoples and to make sure you're protecting the environment. That's what Canadians asked us to do. That's what we will be doing.
Honourable Member for Carleton. Order.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister personally intervened to veto a pipeline to the Pacific. Then he regulated to death another pipeline to the Atlantic. That means we have to send billions of dollars in discounted oil to Donald Trump's America. He then raised taxes on businesses, which has led Canadian investment in the U.S. to go up 2/3, while American investment in Canada is down by half. He then gave $4 billion to a Texas oil company to build pipelines down south. With enemies like that, Donald Trump doesn't need friends, Mr. Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is just too much wrong with the previous member's statement to go through it, but I will address the question of Energy East. Mr. Speaker, a private company made a determination that they no longer wanted to move forward with a project where oil was was at half the price of what it had been when they initially proposed that project. It actually never reached a point where we could have weighed in on it one way or another, because they withdrew the project because they also had another pipeline going south that they had trouble filling the space on. Mr. Speaker, this was a market decision by a private company, but the member opposite doesn't really know anything about that, does he?
Order. The honourable member. Order. The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
This summer I met Petra Schultz, an Edmonton mother who lost her son to an opioid overdose. She described the devastating impact this tragedy had on her family and many like hers. Today, we learn that over 1,000 Canadians lost their lives to opioid overdoses in the first 3 months of 2018, a 5% increase over 2017 and a 44% jump over 2016. Mr. Speaker, opioid deaths have increased every single year of this government's mandate. Will the Prime Minister admit his approach is failing and tell this House what he'll do to reverse this deadly epidemic?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are deeply concerned about the opioid crisis in Canada. Between January 2016 and March 2018, approximately 8,000 Canadians tragically lost their lives to apparent opioid-related overdoses. We have responded with new federal investments, new legislation, and regulatory action, such as $231.4 million in investments to improve access to treatment, to address stigma, and to gather more data to help address the opioid crisis. We know, Mr. Speaker, there is much more work to do, but we will not treat this as a criminal issue. We will work with our partners to increase access to treatment.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, the 15 weeks of EI sick leave are unfair. Joanne, one of our fellow citizens, had to go back to work while she was still sick, only 3 months after a very serious breast cancer case. What happens when people go back to work sick? They relapse. Joanne and her family lost everything, their home and their life savings. And what are the Liberals doing? Nothing. Hundreds of thousands of people need more than 15 weeks to get better. So when will this government finally act? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is always difficult to hear stories of Canadians who are ill, and we are doing everything we can to help them. We have taken concrete commitments in order to improve the EI system to ensure that it responds better to the needs of Canadians. We have put in place the new caregivers benefit. We have made the EI rules more flexible, and we have speeded up the application process so that Canadians can get benefits more rapidly. There is always more to do, and we are working with Canadian families to help them even more.
St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the economic, cultural, and ecological importance of our oceans to Atlantic Canadians cannot be overstated. And as depicted in Robert Chafe's play Between Breaths, the goals of working the sea and protecting our country's endangered whales are both vitally important to us. Can the Prime Minister confirm that our government's significant measures to protect the North Atlantic right whale have balanced the protection of this iconic species with the health of Atlantic Canada's fisheries?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member from St. John's East for his question. We've put in place the necessary measures to protect this iconic species and to ensure continued access to our fisheries. Since taking clear and coordinated action, I'm happy to report that thus far we have not had a single reported death of a North Atlantic right whale in Canadian waters. I also want to thank industry leaders who cooperated with our measures, but I am glad that our snow crab and lobster fishers have also enjoyed good fishing seasons.
Honourable member for Banff Airdrie.
Mr. Speaker, when knocking on doors in my riding this summer, I kept hearing frustration. Frustration at this Prime Minister's continual failures. His failure to build a pipeline. His failure to support Canadian oil and instead importing it from countries like Saudi Arabia. His failure to keep jobs in Canada. His failure to support small businesses and instead over-regulating and over-taxing them, putting some of them right out of business. Does the Prime Minister understand that his failures are costing Canadians their livelihoods, and does he even care?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only do we care about Canadians, but we've invested concretely in making their lives better. We're talking about 500,000 new full-time jobs since we took office. We're talking about the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. We're talking about investments that have lifted hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty. We have lowered taxes for small businesses. We are drawing in global investment. We are delivering on the highest growth in the G7 last year. This is what Canadians expected. This is what we are delivering for the middle class and those working hard to
join. Order. The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
But not for middle-class oil and gas workers. 1.2 million barrels a day are flowing through new pipelines approved and built under Conservatives, which will be 2 million when Keystone XL is done. No tax dollars needed. As of today, the Liberals have added zero after 3 years in government and blew $4.5 billion tax dollars that will go into the U.S. And every time the Prime Minister points to the past and blames others, he admits he failed. And they still have no plan for the future. Their summer of failure is becoming their legacy of failure, and it's hurting the whole country. When will he pull his ban on pipelines, Bill C-69, and give a plan for Trans Mountain?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just to correct the record a little bit, as a government, we have expanded export capacity for the Alberta Clipper project. We approved the Nova Gas Pipeline, the Line 3 replacement project, the Arnold Apatite Mine, Wood Fibre LNG, the Ridley Island Propane Terminal. We are moving forward on getting projects done and getting them done the right way, which both respects Indigenous peoples and works in partnership with them. We are working to make sure that the environmental science and protection of our ecosystems is front of mind. We know that 10 years of failure by the Conservatives because of narrowing the scope of projects needs instead to restore confidence of Canadians.
Honourable Member for Lakeland.
What about Trans Mountain? And for the last 2 years, they said over and over that their plan would have shovels in the ground by now. The Prime Minister himself said, quote, our government has completed the deepest consultations with rights holders ever on a major project in this country. He claimed their process brought in, quote, Indigenous communities, respects science, and gets the social relations. Well, the court clearly ruled he failed, 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 and failed. And today, there is no Trans Mountain expansion, and it's been 20 days without a plan. So why should Canadians believe any word he ever says?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
See, here's the difficulty, Mr. Speaker, for Conservatives. They've actually spent the past 3 years telling us we shouldn't be doing so much on the environment. We shouldn't be fretting about consultation with Indigenous peoples. We should just plow ahead like Stephen Harper did. Well, he didn't succeed in 10 years of trying to plow ahead. And what we've heard from the court recently was that it was good that we were doing consultations and working with Indigenous people. It's good that we were taking seriously the science, but we need to do a little more. That leaves the Conservatives on the wrong side of history, and we are going to do things the right way.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
When asked about the job losses in the energy sector, a direct result of Liberal failure on pipeline like Trans Mountain, the Liberals' response is to take credit for jobs at Amazon. Are they trying to say that the thousands of highly skilled professionals, welders, pipe fitters, engineers, who have lost jobs across Canada should find work at an Amazon warehouse? Another 8,000 Canadians are unemployed because of the Prime Minister's summer of failure. Wow. What is the Prime Minister's plan to get these experienced professionals back to work, I don't know, in the energy sector?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what folks in the energy sector understand very clearly is there is no path forward for our energy sector unless we also protect the environment, unless we build partnerships with Indigenous peoples. The old ways of doing things failed for 10 years under Conservatives. We now know that being respectful and thoughtful about how we move forward is what Canadians expect. That is exactly what we are going to do. While they are still worried about suddenly putting a price on pollution, we know that moving forward responsibly is the only way to get things done in this country.
Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, recently I heard from Stefan, a veteran from my riding diagnosed with PTSD while serving in the Canadian Navy for 28 years. Counseling, medication, and therapy weren't working for him. It wasn't until he got his service dog, Sarge, that he could finally get out of the house, go for a walk, and talk to people. Sarge saved his life. The long-awaited Laval University study states that service dogs, like Sarge, save veterans' lives. Yet the Liberals continue to deny veterans and their families the funding they need. Why is this government stalling in providing the funding required for life-saving service dogs for veterans?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As people have seen from investments of close to $10 billion in our veterans over the past 3 years, the mental health and well-being of veterans and families is a priority for this government. We've heard from veterans, the veterans community, that this is an important issue to them. So in Budget 2018, we expanded the medical expense tax credit for recognizing costs for psychiatric service dogs for 2018 and future years. And being based in evidence is important to us, so we're currently funding 3 research initiatives related to service animals. We continue to monitor the research to ensure that we're making the best decisions to support our veterans.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, for over a year, my office has been helping a mother whose son is in the military. Her son has PTSD and tragically is also suicidal. And despite his serious injury and critical situation, he's been forced to wait for almost a year for his medical claim to be processed by Veterans Affairs. He feels his government has abandoned him, and there are 7 others in his unit who feel the same. When will this government keep its promise to our veterans and get them the help that they so desperately need?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, this government recognizes that we have a sacred obligation to support our veterans and their families, and that includes investments in mental health. We have invested over the past 3 years about $10 billion in helping our veterans, in supporting their families, in moving forward on veterans' mental health benefits and supports, in reopening shuttered Veterans Affairs offices, but we recognize there is still more to do. We are working hard to meet the expectations and the needs of the veterans who've served this country so excellently for so many years. We will continue to be there for them, and I thank the member for her question.
Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's policies have once again failed our military. Canada needs effective equipment and highly trained personnel to maintain our defence obligations, but reports say that our military has a shortage of 275 pilots. As a former Air Force officer, I know that pilots do not want to fly 40-year-old used Australian F-18 fighter jets. Those planes are older than our current ones. Will this Prime Minister start supporting our military to attract and retain the pilots we need and finally cancel the interim purchase of these used fighter jets?
Order. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As the member well knows, after a decade of Conservative cuts, we are proud that our government is making landmark investments in the Canadian Armed Forces. There has never been a better time for Canadians to join Canada's defence team. We're taking action to boost retention of our women and men in uniform, including with tax breaks and with more than $6 million a year for support and services for military families. We've introduced initiatives to speed up recruitment and training to ensure our Royal Canadian Air Force has all it needs to accomplish its mission.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, the Prime Minister has had 3 years, and his only solution is to spend $500 million on a pile of scrap metal from Australia. The Prime Minister just doesn't understand the consequences of his failures. Now, this report confirms that the Royal Canadian Air Force is short 275 pilots. And why are they leaving? Because nobody wants to fly a bunch of old, rusted-out fighter jets from Australia. When will the Prime Minister cancel this asinine interim policy of buying used jets, recruit and train new pilots, and finally stop failing our troops?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know I'm not the only one in this House finds it a little bit rich that the Conservatives are complaining about procurement processes when they completely botched our fighter jet procurement process from the beginning. They completely failed to get the equipment needed to our armed forces. They created the capability gap. We are fixing that. We are ensuring that the men and women in uniform who serve this country are used to given the equipment they need and not just used for photo ops like the Conservatives did every damn time.
The honourable member for Brantford-Brant.
The Prime Minister has failed to give injured veterans the support they have earned. Remember, the Prime Minister has told veterans that they are asking for too much. Yet these Liberals are giving a man convicted of murdering a police officer, a man who is not a veteran himself, money meant for veterans. He killed her, put her body in a compost bin, and dumped her under a bridge. When will the Prime Minister step in and stop this outrageous abuse of veterans' benefits?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Here's something that we saw for 10 years the Conservative government did not acknowledge. When a man or woman serves in Canada's armed forces or in the RCMP, their whole family serves with them. We have made it a priority to not only improve benefits and services for our nation's veterans, but for their families as well. Since 2016, investments have totaled $10 billion for veterans programs and services, including the hiring of over 470 staff to increase delivery capacity. In regards to the tragic and terrible case the member opposite mentioned, due to laws around privacy and confidentiality.
The honourable member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands the importance of fostering a culture of curiosity among our kids and youth. Today is the Prime Minister's Science Fair, which highlights both our outstanding students and science centres across Canada. I am extremely excited to see all of the amazing projects that the students have brought for us today. Can the Prime Minister please explain to this House the benefits of getting our youth interested in science?
Right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Scarborough Agincourt for her work on her file and her question. We are delivering on our promise to restore science to its rightful place in Canada. We are strengthening Canada's labs and classrooms with the largest investment in fundamental research in Canada's history. I'm looking forward to seeing the amazing work of our youngest researchers and scientists later today and invite everyone to come join. Unlike the Harper Conservatives, we celebrate, promote, and believe in science-based decision-making.
The honourable member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand why the dairy producers from across Canada are here on the Hill. Does he even know why the next generation of producers protested in front of his office this summer? Well, I can tell him why. Because they don't believe him. He plays with words. He hasn't told them about his real intentions with regard to supply management. Will he finally tell the truth? Or, once again, is he going to add another failure to his list of summer failures? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would like to thank the Conservative member for defending supply management. I note it is not unanimous on their side of their House. So I know that on this side, we all agree that supply management is a priority for our government and for Canadians. We're going to continue to protect supply management and to support our farm producers, especially our dairy producers. They do excellent work every single day to deliver a clean, high-quality product to Canadians. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the last Genie ceremony recalled the work of a number of generations of Quebecers to put culture on our screens, but the problem is that is now in danger. Our young people are growing up with Netflix and YouTube, multinationals that couldn't care less about our language and culture. The former Heritage Minister spent 3 years saying it was time to act, but then she did nothing. Does the new Minister of Heritage, will he stop will he let the Minister of Heritage do his work and intervene before the next elections? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that it is important to protect culture in Quebec and across Canada, and that is why that we invested historic amounts to restore funding to Radio-Canada CBC. We doubled funding for the Canada Council of the Arts, and we are going to continue to invest and to defend our cultural industries because we know that it is good for our identity, but it is also good for jobs and the economy. I trust our Minister of Heritage, and I know that he's going to continue his excellent work. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. To ensure the safety of Canadians, we have to cope with instability across the globe. In November, we announced a series of commitments with a view to optimizing Canada's impact and to allow it to be as useful as possible within UN efforts. In March, we announced that we were intending to deploy an operational air task force in Mali for a period of 1 year. Can the Prime Minister please update us on this peacekeeping operations in Mali? Thank you. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Saint Jean for his question and for his work. After a decade of darkness under the Conservatives, we are getting involved again in peacekeeping in Mali. In August, we attained our full operational capacity in Mali. Our armed forces are working closely with UN forces, and they are providing a medevac service 24/7, which is saving lives. I'd like to thank our brave men and women in uniform for the unbelievable work that they do every day. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse et Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after the terrible fire that destroyed the Voltigeur de Québec Armory, we, the Conservatives, spared no effort to restore this gem of Quebec heritage. But after their lamentable summer of failure, two experts confirmed today that the Liberals are attacking the integrity of the Quebec Citadel with non-compliant, lesser-quality American stone. It is still a time for them to undo this insult by using the original stone. So what is the Prime Minister waiting for to take our heritage seriously? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we care about the historical heritage of Quebec City, especially that of the old city and its UNESCO status, and we are protecting it. The bidder must respect the guidelines to ensure that the UNESCO status is adhered to. And the department is going to do due diligence because we understand how important it is for the city. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, in the midst of the election campaign, all four party leaders presented a united front on supply management. It's a national priority. The four leaders are calling on the Canadian government to protect supply management in its entirety. Will the Canadian government agree with the Quebec consensus and commit to protecting supply management in its entirety, or will it decide to listen to the Conservatives' main advisor, Brian Mulroney, who wants to open yet another gap in supply management? Why does he never say in its entirety? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, as I have said many times in this House, and as I have told the farmers and dairy producers in Canada, we are going to protect supply management. We know that Americans want us to eliminate this system that works for Canadians and that works for our farmers and dairy producers, and we're going to continue to defend the supply management system that works.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker, it was brought to my attention that an outburst of enthusiasm. I may have used a word that was unparliamentary. I withdraw that word and apologize to anyone who was offended.
I thank the Right Honourable Prime Minister for his apology.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent of the House for the following motion.
The government to put the complete abolition of the system of supply management on the negotiating table in order to facilitate a new NAFTA agreement with our American partners and bring down the prices of milk, poultry and eggs for Canadian consumers. Yes?
Does the Honourable Member have unanimous unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? No, there is no consent. Order is, oh no, tabling of documents.